So I've been doing a lot of research on the geopolitics of the world right now and the US economy and the US dollar. And there's not a lot of people covering why the US wants to take Greenland, why the US took out President Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. We literally did a special military operation on Venezuela like China wants to do to Taiwan, like Russia's doing in Ukraine, and we did it in a day. But now Venezuela is going through it. It's not really clear what the plan is there. The US does what it does best, which is create a power vacuum and then not really have a plan on what happens after that power vacuum's created. So I wanted to go through some of this research that I've done. I've written a lot of articles on this. This one's When Money Fails, Military Force Reigns Supreme, Seizing Russian Assets, and the Debasement of the Dollar. And America's 2026 economy is more fragile than 2008. Let's start with the seizing Russian assets and the debasement of the US dollar, because that's a good starting point in chronological order. So as we know, in February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion into Ukraine after they took Crimea, and they saw the West wouldn't really support Ukraine or provide as much support as they were kind of scared of. They saw the West didn't do anything when they took Crimea, when the Donbass War was happening, 2014 to 2022, and then they launched a full-scale invasion into Ukraine in 2022. And you saw in 2022 the freezing of minimum $300 billion in Russian assets. The critical part of this was that these Russian assets were stored in US dollars. And the US and its allies, NATO and the EU, these Western countries, called for the seizing of these assets. And Biden was president at the time. Unfortunately, the US went ahead and seized these assets. And I say unfortunately for 1 second, let me get there. The seizing of these assets has led to the full-scale debasement of the US dollar, because countries saw that their US dollars held in Western countries could be seized if they did something the West didn't like. And now these countries aren't looking to start full-scale invasions of other countries, but they saw that if the West would use their power to seize US denominated currencies and assets that they had control over if they didn't like what that other country did. So this caused a full-scale abandonment of the dollar. The dollar at one point was 70% of the world's reserve currency. Right now, I believe it is roughly 58% of global foreign exchange reserves. So over the last 5 years, it's plummeted as the world reserve currency of the West. And the only reason the US has maintained its power is because ever since it left the gold standard, it has maintained power by having its currency be the reserve currency of the West. Reserve currencies date back all the way to, the UK when they were ruling the world, Denmark. I can go through a couple of them, but actually let's just keep it relevant to this. This action of seizing Russian assets, 300 billion roughly, probably more because of all these other sanctions, signaled to other countries that sovereign assets could be leveraged as geopolitical tools, essentially eroding trust in the dollar system. Nations like China, India, and Russia responded by accelerating their bilateral trade in local currencies. For instance, China-Russia trade reached 90% non-dollar settlements by 2025. So last year, 90% of their trade is in non-dollar settlements. So they probably use the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble. Rupee ruble trade for Russian oil imports. And that's why you saw Trump, I believe he went over there to see the president of India and is urging them to stop doing their Russian oil trades. But the US doesn't have anything to offer in return. We're saying don't do this trade for oil, for cheap oil, buy oil over here more expensively with the dollar, and it doesn't really benefit India. The US is on the decline of its world power, of its leverage that it has, because of all these mistakes that it's made. Some people say it's a global conspiracy to accelerate the start of the new world order, or whatever this is, and there's something to that. It might be, for some reason, for whatever reason, a planned decline of the US. I don't think that's true. I think it's mainly this insanely bureaucratic system where these people get in charge and they don't really understand geopolitics. I mean, Trump was he's a businessman and he's been good at it, but it's probably more his team, and he's good at making deals, but he doesn't understand the fragile structure of ruling a nation. Ruling a nation is different than building $1 billion business real estate empire off debt. I mean, It's kind of what the US has been doing, but the fragile system of ruling a nation and having your nation's dollar, your nation's currency, be the reserve currency of the world, that takes diplomacy. I digress. So all these BRICS nations are emphasizing alternative payment systems. They view the freeze as evidence that non-compliance with Western policies could result in asset seizing, that their assets could get stolen if they don't go along with the trade deal or something like this. That why would they risk having their money in the dollar if it could get seized? I'll throw this up there, but this chart is the chart of the US dollar as a reserve currency to gold. And you see starting in 24, mainly in 25, it started going down. 24, it starts to go down a little bit. 25, it's a massive sell off of dollars for gold by European countries, Chinese, Russia, by all major nations. And this is why you see silver, gold, copper skyrocketing right now. And why this worked for so long for the West was this petrodollar system. Once we got off the gold standard, we went to the petrodollar system. And this petrodollar system relies on oil exporting nations recycling surplus into dollar denominated assets. So all these nations that exported oils, their surplus of their currencies or that they didn't need to spend would be stored in dollar denominated assets, buying dollars back. It sustained this global demand for currency. It's such a weird, abstract thing on how it works. But essentially, when you buy oil, when you're exporting oil, the US had all these weird deals, and it's probably why you saw us in the Middle East for so long, to prop up the dollar and to prop up these countries to ensure that they were using greenbacks, the US dollar, to export their oil. So they're buying dollars, they're using dollars, and it keeps it as this reserve currency of the world, and it keeps our dollar strong. The Russian asset freeze showed these risks that dollars could be weaponized. And then you see us go in recently to Venezuela and steal their president, Nicolas Maduro. And one of the main reasons, actually the only reasons, is oil. He was selling oil, and he wasn't selling oil with US dollars. He was selling it with Chinese yen, with Russian rubles, with cryptocurrency. He was selling it with everything other than dollars. And that's why the US went in and stole him, and also wants to maintain control of Venezuela for their oil. We can, through Venezuela, sell oil with dollars, and it backs our dollar. All those $17 trillion in oil that's underneath Venezuela, apparently it's not really good oil. It's not this sweet Texas oil the US mainly refines. It's apparently really dirty, sticky, like not good oil. So you need all these new refinery systems in place that the US is going to have to fund through debt. But it's the assets that are crucial to back the dollar. And it's one of the reasons we want Greenland. Trump is so hard set on Greenland, is the raw materials. Even though, same thing with Venezuelan oil, it's going to be hard to refine. Those minerals used for US weapon systems in Greenland, they're these crucial minerals for building technology. It's incredibly hard to mine there. It's incredibly hard to source that, to build those systems in place because of the weather, because of how cold it is. Mining those are incredibly difficult, but just saying that you own them might be enough to back the dollar. So these are risky plays. They're risky plays by Trump to have the US remain a global hegemon. I think the one thing he's lacking is the use of diplomacy. I think that's really eroding the dollar's trust as well, pushing apart our allies, Western allies, NATO countries, Canada. Canada got pushed so hard, and they made a huge deal with China for pushing apart our NATO European allies, which is further eroding trust in the dollar. And they're seeing Russia, China, and India sell off dollars for gold, and they're following suit. So diplomacy would have been crucial in mitigating this happening by being diplomatic, and also by supporting Ukraine based on the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, where the US, the UK forced Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons. And through doing that, the US, the UK, the West would support and defend Ukraine. And we haven't done that since Russia took Crimea, since Russia launched a full-scale invasion. We've done it in this half-hearted, half-assed kind of way. And it shows that treaties that the West makes, we don't back up, which further erodes trust, which further erodes alliances. I want to go into this other analysis that I did. When money fails, military force reigns supreme. So this is kind of touching on everything that we touched on, but it's going more in depth into the US dollar's money is failing. We have $38 trillion in debt. The interest payments on that debt are now around $1 trillion, which is the entire military budget of the US, which is why you saw Trump just increase, or is making a play to increase, the military budget from $900 billion to $1.5 trillion. That's to further back up our power, because this money is paper. This money is, it's a paper currency. There's nothing really backing it other than assets the US holds, income that the US brings in through taxes, and its military, its force, its play saying, hey, we can steal your president if you don't go by our rules. We will come in there and take your president. We'll do it. So I think this is another really important part on how the US currency works, and how everything that the administration is doing right now ties into trying to scramble, like scrap and save this US dollar from debasement, from a full scale debasement. Because if it crashes, and it's starting to crash, things are going to get really weird. Things are going to get really bad. You can't print your way out of a debt trap, which is what we're in. I mean, our debt's at $38 trillion. Interest payments are $1 trillion. We borrow $8 billion a day to keep our economy running. So it seems like some of these conspiracy theories about how they want to reset the West, create a new world order, might be true, in the fact of they want to destroy it, crumble it, and from the ashes build a new society where the United States, Canada, the EU are all under one government, using central bank digital currencies as money. I would have said this is crazy. I was saying this was crazy up until I saw the latest Epstein release, and it seems like a lot of conspiracy theories are real and true. And you see all these quote unquote elites talking about New World Order, central bank digital currencies. You see them all talking about this, all pushing for it. Things look like they will get very strange. This all leads to World War III, essentially. You see China ramping up. I mean, the US, the EU, Ukraine are fighting Russian troops, North Korean troops, backed up by Chinese logistical supplies in Ukraine. You have the West fighting Russians and North Koreans. 20 years ago, that would have been unheard of. If you told people that, they wouldn't believe you. Global military spending right now for all countries is about 2.7 trillion in 2024. It's projected to reach 4.7 to 6.7 trillion by 2035 at the current rate. The US leads with 83 billion. It's soon to rise to 1.5 trillion. China follows at about 303 billion. They're really increasing their military spending as well. And this kind of signals a multipolar shift. I wrote this other article on America's 2026 economy is more fragile than 2008, and then I try to make some comparisons to the Great Depression as well. The 2008 financial crisis was kind of just a localized banking failure, housing bubble, and that's kind of scary to think about, because it wasn't small per se, but it wasn't what we have today. What we have today is a crash of the dollar's value, a crash of the dollar being the world reserve currency. You have the highest debt the US and any country has ever had in history. You also have massive unemployment in the US. You have massive inflation. You have food prices increasing. You also have less home buyers than there are sellers for the first time since 2008. So what we have now looks like it's about to be a much larger crash than what happened in 2008. In 2008, crashed the whole world economy. This looks a lot scarier than that, and I'm not really sure if you can mitigate it. This looks like it's too late. You see some mitigation efforts that aren't talked about in the mainstream news, mainstream media. The last 3 weeks of December 2025, the Federal Reserve injected record liquidity via overnight injections, surpassing historical levels. On December 31st, 2025, the New Year's, they launched a 74.6 billion repo through the standing repo facility, the highest single day amount ever amid end of year pressures. I saw almost no reporting and no news on that. And they launched it on New Year's, so people would be distracted. So before that 74.6 billion injected on December 31st or January 1st, they launched 40 billion repo injections over that month, and then ended the month with 74.6 billion in repo injections. So you see a massive amount of printing with repo injections, but you also see a massive amount of printing, and they don't really talk about this, but with loans that they give out. So you have these Federal Reserve banks like JP Morgan Chase can get billions of dollars at 0% interest rates from the Federal Reserve. You also see this with corporations in the United States, where they can take out billion-dollar loans at 0% interest rate. They do stock buybacks. So that's why you see the US economy and stock markets at all-time highs, when on the ground it doesn't reflect. On the ground, people are struggling. On the ground, people can't afford food. I mean, it's hard to eat healthy. It's so expensive to eat healthy. Eating meals with whole foods in general is very expensive. I mean, even eating at McDonald's is expensive. Eating anywhere is expensive right now. You go to a grocery store, you walk out with one or two bags, and it costs $100 to $200. The U.S. economy is really hurting, and I don't see enough accurate and fair reporting on this. You only see reporting on the numbers that the government is giving us, and the US government is lying in those numbers. You can see this through the amount of jobs that they say they create every month, and then you can look at how many jobs are actually real and actually get filled. It's something along the lines of like 6 out of 10 private sector jobs don't get filled or aren't real right now. And it's super similar numbers in the governmental sector where they make jobs and then those jobs never get filled and those people never get hired, but they have all these jobs postings that they can tie into their jobs report and make it seem really good. So everything, all these numbers that are coming out from our government is a fugazi. They're fake.